So, we hear all the stuff around screens being really, really bad and awful and horrible, and parents and families are always asking, how much is too much and where should we draw the line, and we never see our children, they never come out of their rooms. So I think the first part that I'd like to address is how problematic it is for us as families when we go seeking solutions and answers outside of ourselves on things like that. Because, especially for neurodivergent families, I'll tell you why. The research that professionals and the media will quote or refer to when they talk about how awful screens are, a lot of that research actually excludes autistic people. It also excludes people who are ADHD. And so when those statistics or that research is being used to put the fear into the world about using screens, we can kind of guess that our brains haven't been a part of that research. I remember learning how useful it is to Google the same problems generations ago. And an example of this is television. When television first came out, there were people lobbying for children to not be exposed to television screens. And there was protesting, and there were people writing research articles, and there were people writing opinion pieces into the paper about how damaging it is for children to watch TV. So we had the same thing back then. And then it was, arcades with arcade games, and it's always going to be something. Anything that involves technology, anything that involves children, anything that's new, anything that's perhaps technologically advanced to the point where we as families don't know as much as our children, that's going to leave adults feeling out of control, like there's a power imbalance. It's going to be confronting and cause a lot of panic. We tend to approach parenting that way, don't we? Or the advice that we get as parents tends to be panic driven. Like, don't let them get away with this or that, and make sure you're in control. It's all about authoritarian type parenting. Now, I think it's important, and I always support and promote us tuning into what works for us as individuals, as families, and we're all going to be different. Somebody's just said in the comments there, hi Julie, welcome, that they find, Mel says, my guy loves it, but I do find he gets aggressive afterwards. It's a difficult balance. It absolutely can be a difficult balance. I'd like to try and reframe something, because I hear this a lot from parents, is that their children become very aggressive during their screen time or afterwards. So children who are highly anxious, children who are autistic, ADHD, PDA especially, when we are given restrictions or limitations around something, our neurobiological response is almost frenzied and desperate to have more and more and more of that thing that we've just had restricted. And a lot of people will come back and say, well, we can't just let them have their screens forever. We'll never see them. But part of the issue there is that our children are so desperate sometimes to get to those screens that they will start employing lots of techniques and approaches and strategies to be able to get to it. They may start fixating on accessing their screens, so talking to us about it all day long non-stop, text messaging us about it, sending us an email. It might be that they are asking, well, when is it 4 o'clock? If we've told them they can have their screen at 4. Is it 4 o'clock yet? How much longer till 4 o'clock? Ah, I'm so bored. We know all the ways that this goes, right? What can happen, especially for PDAs, is that when there is a time limit over our access to screens, the demand pressure increases. And so our time with the screen is kind of ruined because we feel like we're in a pressure cooker. And then when we finally hand the screen back, we feel ripped off and annoyed and like we didn't get enough time, because the time that we have with the device sometimes involves people hovering over. Now, I want to make it really clear that I'm a parent. I totally get it. I've got a really sordid background with screen control and my children. So I understand why we employ the techniques that we do. There's a lot of panic around our children and their screens and what they're exposed to. But I find that for many families who have children that are fixated on needing their screen and desperate to have it at all times, and we never see them because they're in their rooms all the time, a lot of the time when we try an approach that means hands off, just have the screens available, to begin with, our children are going to lock themselves in their rooms with those screens, making up for lost time, clinging on to them for dear life because they feel like they're going to be taken away. But after some time, our children will begin to join us back in the family room. They may bring their devices with them, but they will start to join the land of the living again. Or, over time, what we often see is they need the device less and less because the trust has built that it won't be taken away. Their threat response is de-escalated and their anxiety calms down around their need to have it all the time. Some other really important points to consider are that everything that therapeutic approaches, that professionals, that textbooks encourage autistic children to develop in terms of skills is often on the other side of a screen. And I want people to know that when you're an autistic person, like myself, and you're a child, and you are still developing, understanding neuronormative social connections, we are often put in a situation where we're on the spot. Now, if I want to observe the way my non-autistic peers interact and be a part of the group without being rejected or without being seen as odd, it's much easier for me to spend time doing this over across a screen, because it is safe, because we can observe, come from a place of safety where we can process what's going on, make our observations, think about what we want to say, Google idioms and things we don't understand or haven't heard before, and then come back and give a response. In the real world, when we're children, or in real time, because screens are still the real world, often what happens is we are so busy processing and we don't get enough time to think about what we're going to say, that we end up looking like we are staring at everybody else in this social interaction We're looking them up and down. We're staring at their faces because we are observing their body language and taking it all in and processing what it all means. And then when it's our turn to talk, sometimes we don't realize, or we have no idea what to say, or we just blurt something out. Allowing us the safety of having a social network across a screen as well means that we have time to process. We have time to build those skills and to make those observations from a space that is safe, where we will not be rejected or disapproved of or seen as odd or weird or things that are hurtful. We just need more processing time. Love the focus on building safety and trust and the impact this has on the nervous system. Summer! Hello! Lisa says, when I lower the access to the screens, my son is less aggressive, more focused on homeschooling. I wonder though if he's masking instead of it being beneficial to not have the screen. It's hard to assess for me. That's why I turn to Kristy and this group. Feel very lost, as it seems to be the catalyst that causes the violence and aggression. Yes, well, that's a really great question, Lisa. So I think it's important to look at the first part here where you say, my son is less aggressive, more focused on homeschooling without the screen or when the screen access is lowered. You wonder if he's masking, because at the end of the day, the violence and aggression is mainly centered around screen time. So I'm wondering if, what might it look like if we change the way we do things? I think it's okay to sit with the discomfort about how it might turn out, but to realize that projecting into the future may be really unhelpful. I mean, so here's a part of our story as a family. My 23-year-old, and she might be watching now, I'm not sure. My 23-year-old, who at the time was 15, 16, just had to have a screen all the time. Now this is back when we didn't realise that we were autistic people, and you know, I was still doing the whole needing control all the time, being a PDA, being terrified of my children not respecting me, all of that. She had to have a screen all the time, and I was cracking down on the rules, really, focused on time restrictions and limits, and I would take away apps and delete entire websites that she had built and all sorts of things like that. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. I was very, very desperate. You did find me live, Nellie, welcome. I was really, really desperate. Then what started happening was friends at my child's school were lending her devices to hide in her room. She was coming out less and less. We were becoming more and more disconnected. There was tension in our marriage. There was yelling and screaming and swearing and crying and all of that, all because of screens. Now, for a long time I blamed the screens, and I blamed everything outside of our family. And then I thought one day, you know what? I'm defeated. I give up. I just give up. What might it look like if I don't put so much focus and attention on devices? And amazingly, we now have children who don't feel like they have to be on their devices 24/7, because we've never made it taboo. We've never had restrictions there with our other children. And so it hasn't been an issue. The thing is, sometimes when we allow more time on devices, or we compromise or negotiate, We think that we are not putting demands in front of our children or additional pressure while they're using their screens, but sometimes we are inadvertently. So I know for me, my child would be in their room on their screens, and I would knock on the door every 5 minutes, stick my head in. How you going? What you doing on there? Oh, you're drawing. What are you drawing? Too much. It's too much. And I just thought, if I kind of went in and checked every now and then, it would be okay. But that's demand pressure. And so that makes our children feel like the circle is closing in on them, and they can't have their freedom to use that time to be on a screen. This morning, I did a live at 5 a.m. with Laura Kirby and Jodie Izzet, and I loved what Laura was saying about when she would get home from school as a young person, she'd just read and read and read and read and read, and I would do the same. I'd either watch TV all afternoon, or I would read and read and read and read, sometimes entire books, just on my bed, shut the door, decompressing after a day at school. And when we are going to school all day, when we are masking or compliant or getting on in the world, when we get home at the end of the day, or when we have time out at the end of the day, we need processing time. If we don't get that, we become explosive. And for some of us, when we are doing our very best to get on in the world and we're masking or we're fawning, or even when we're not, we still need that time to process. And sometimes that screen will be the thing that regulates us, that centers us, that soothes us, and sometimes it will be the only thing we have any kind of control over or say over in our lives. Sometimes the only safe support network that we have is on the other side of that screen. Sometimes our hobbies and our passions and our interests are on the other side of that screen. Sometimes taking that screen away feels like taking away a part of our world. It's like grounding a teenager or a young person from going out and spending time with their friends. For neurodivergent children, sometimes being on the screen is our form of going out and hanging out with our friends. So it's going to be different for every child. It's going to be different for every family. But sometimes I think we have to look outside of the box of blaming the screen, or thinking that it's the screen that is the problem. Because sometimes it's the limits and the restrictions we put on our children's access to things that keep them feeling safe, centered, calm, regulated, and happy. Is this making sense? It's so hard, Lisa. It is really hard. There's no simple answers or solutions. I think, oh, hello, Kieran Rose. How dare you pop up on my live and start putting your 2 bobs worth in? Just kidding. It can be the removal of safety, yes. Yeah. I'm just trying to catch up on comments. I struggle with screen time during the homeschool day. Any thoughts on this? What's the struggle, Nellie, specifically? The thing too is I can't remember what I was going to say. ADHD. saw a comment and I was going to respond and I can't remember where it was and what I was going to say. Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know. The thing is too, I mean, we live in a world where screens are everywhere. It's almost impossible to get through life without one. And I'm on my screen all the time. I can tell you now, as an adult PDA, I don't ever say, I'm going to go to bed by 10 o'clock, because then my brain won't let me do that. So instead what I do is I go, oh yeah, I feel like I could probably lay down for a bit. And I take my screen and I watch videos on Facebook, or I look up things of interest on YouTube, or I talk to my friends, or I watch a meditation, or I get up some visual stims, or my daughter and I watch funny cat videos. This is how we regulate at the end of the day, and then when we've had enough, we doze off to sleep. My worry is not screens per se, it's that she wants to play PUBG in every break. I don't know what PUBG is, but I think it's okay, because if she's doing learning and doing everything that she's meant to be and all of that, then why not? Why can't she spend her time doing something that is grounding and centering and brings her happiness? Half of my daughter's study, if not more, is done on a screen. Hardly any research is done via books. Yeah, and we kind of didn't get a choice in that one, did we, Suzanne? I remember feeling really sad that one of the libraries at a university was being wiped out and replaced with screens, because I love the tangible sensory experience of having a book, sniffing it, feeling the pages. I wonder whether the screen feels better than the HS because of the demand of writing, boredom, and therefore the aggression comes from wanting the screen to avoid HS. Homeschool? Is HS homeschool? Could be, Lisa. It could be. I wonder if you've had a conversation with him about it and talked about this with him. How do you handle content monitoring when the internet is pretty much everything all the time, uncensored? There are programs that you can purchase or put a pin on things. We use YouTube Kids instead of YouTube. That's just something that is always evolving, isn't it? And it can be really tricky. But yeah, I think that much of the information that we have out there is going to be geared toward neuronormative standards. Our brains are different. We're wired differently. We created this stuff. And the thing is, like I said in the opening of the discussion with myself, a lot of the research that is referred to when we're putting out this information for parents excludes autistic people. I'm constantly on screens. I'm on a screen for work right now. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I look at my screen. I turned out okay, I like to think. I don't mind that my kids have access to their screens on demand, but I also think it's important for them to be active for health reasons and to be creative to develop fine motor. Where are we? For the upcoming school holidays, I was thinking of introducing a rule about letting them have access 24/7, so long as they do an hour of physical activity and an hour of creativity. What do you think about this? I feel triggered by it. I've got to be honest, Charlene. I'm a PDA, so I feel very triggered by that and very anxious. Are your children PDAs? Because that's a power imbalance right there for PDAs. And it's still a restriction and a limitation. It's still saying you can have this as much as you want as long as you meet these requirements for me. And I would instantly feel anxious and frustrated and agitated and irritable. But that's because I'm PDA. I don't know whether your children are. I think sometimes we make assumptions about our children not developing particular skills because of the time they're spending on their screens as well. There's a lot of skill building going on across screens. Okay. Yeah, I really can't answer that, Charlene. And you know what? I try not to tell other people what to do either. I think that it's really important for us as families to explore. So it's definitely something you could try and see how your children respond to that. Kieran, that does not sound good. As an adult, evening overuse of screens is skewing my sleep. On max dose of melatonin tablets from ADHD specialist, but really suffering, living alone and with poor discipline. It's something I'm resisting improving. Blue light filter, orange lens glasses, perhaps a good idea for ADHD individuals. PDA with the laptop, tech adverse, so have zero computer skills in my 40s. Yeah, I don't share that experience, and I'm ADHD as well. But we're all completely different, aren't we? We're all completely different. I used to think for myself, I always found it tricky not to buy into concepts that were sold to me by society. And I'm definitely not saying that that's what you're doing, Katie, at all. For me personally, I used to go, oh, I'm not sleeping because I'm on my screen all the time. Or I'm not sleeping because my blinds aren't shut and it's completely dark. When I'm not sleeping, it's because I'm anxious, or because I haven't resolved something, or I'm mulling over something that's happened, or, I mean, there's 1,000,001 different reasons why I don't sleep. But for me, the screen definitely helps me get to sleep. Our children don't have screens at bedtime, though. Not because we have a rule, but just because it hasn't been a thing. Okay, what about kids having the device, but then when it comes time to stop, dinner, bedtime, something, regardless of warnings, how else can you avoid the frustration of having to stop? I think that's something that we covered earlier. Warnings, so I think sometimes it's important to be mindful that there will be a lot of information out there about what's helpful for autistic people. Warnings, giving us lots of warnings. So I'm PDA autistic and ADHD, and I think that warnings, I don't handle them well. They make me feel irritable, and I get very cranky and panicky. So yeah, look, some families allow their children to eat and have the screen beside them, but it's up to you to decide whether that's a no-no. If they stop to have dinner, does it mean that's it for the rest of the night? Because that might have an impact on the trouble, but also it is a transition, and transitions can be hard. Yeah. Oh, Katie, I didn't really do anything. I'm interested in hearing more about that. The screen keeping you awake. How do you recommend helping a PDA child get balance in their life with no limits on their screens? We don't overly limit the screens because they definitely help our 7-year-old regulate, but he would spend all his hours on screens and with very limited programs. I feel like some of his social struggles at school is that he has very little to connect with the other kids with. The other kids love soccer and bike riding and different kinds of shows and games and art and Lego, and my little guy's narrow interests ends up excluding him from a lot of play, and it is something he struggles with, but not enough to drive him off the screens to pursue anything else, even without any demands being placed, even if it's something he enjoys, like chess. There's a few things that I want to address in there. So the first thing is, how do you find balance in your life, Brianne, with screens? Because sometimes it's no different for our children. It's hard to find balance when we have the over-looming threat that they'll be taken away, or that we have restrictions on them. The second thing that I would say is, some of his social struggles at school is that he has very little to connect with the other kids with. Well, that might be because he is autistic and they might not be, which presents a cultural mismatch. Interests may be very different, and if he has an interest, he's likely to be working toward expert knowledge and know a hell of a lot about it. Whereas non-autistic children have lots of interests and they rotate all the time. But for us as autistic people, we are monotropic and hyper-focused. So we tend to have one interest at a time that we really hone in on. So I would suggest connecting him with autistic peers for friendship. The other kids love soccer and bike riding and different kinds of shows and games and art and Lego. But that's okay. They can like those things, but it doesn't mean that your beautiful boy has to. Little guy's narrow interests. I think that's what we're told in textbooks, that our interests are narrow, and that's, for me as an autistic person, I find that really offensive and insulting. Not from you, Brianne, from the textbooks saying that our interests are narrow. Because what they're saying is they're narrow in comparison to non-autistic interests. Whereas our interests are very much monotropic, and we have a very different way of processing information and cultivating passion. So I don't think that they're narrow, they're just very different. And if those interests exclude him from play at school, then I would tend to be asking the question around who is assisting the process of his peers understanding that he is autistic and being encouraged to understand diversity and how to include their neurodivergent classmates. Because it should never be a child's responsibility to educate the entire world about himself and to feel like there is something inherently flawed about him or his interests, and that's why he doesn't have people to play with. I think it's important to remember that many of us spent hours on an activity as a child and forgetting to eat, go to the bathroom, etc. well before screens. Interoception mixed with hyperfocus isn't caused by screens. Yeah. Yes, such a good point. Yeah, we were like this before screens, everyone. We really were. He sounds delightful, Brienne. He sounds absolutely delightful. I feel excited when I hear about autistic children having these specialised interests. How gorgeous. If I play Minecraft to 7 p.m, it interferes with my sleep. It is too much stimulation. I tend to dream Minecraft. Oh, Beverly, you're so funny. I tend to dream Minecraft and wake up tired. But I think what Kristy said about anxiety interfering with sleep is true too. I think that it is worse when I play Minecraft in the evening if there is some background anxiety also happening. Yeah, and I think that comes back to us all being so different. There are definitely going to be people that screens interfere with their sleep. I just happen to not be one of those people. Oh, that's hard, Brianne. You know, there is I think PDA Australia, if you look them up on Facebook, they run a gaming group online for PDA autistic children. Alright, everyone, I've been talking for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Talky talk. Thank you for the stars. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the laughter. And I wish you all the very best for the rest of the evening. I am running a live Q&A for an hour tonight for our In Tune with PDA 12-week program, which opens up for registration for round 2 on Monday. See you all. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.